Welcome to Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell. This is the place where we dive into the world of talent acquisition, explore the challenges of today's workplace, and discover what it takes to build a thriving and successful organization.
My guest this week is Risha Grant, an internationally renowned DEI expert. Named a top 10 most powerful women in HR, Risha has brought transformative initiatives to major companies worldwide. As the best-selling author of Be Better Than Your BS, Risha guides audiences to confront biases with humor and storytelling. She teaches radical acceptance and authentic inclusion. Today, we're going to discuss how organizations can retain talent by embracing a Gen Z mindset and centering DEI as people, not politics. Risha, welcome to Fire Your Hiring Habits.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you. So, what initially sparked your passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion work?
Really just probably growing up in a really small town. I'm from Oklahoma, and I grew up in a town with less than 20,000 people, and we would learn things in history about history, of course, but when it came to Black people and people of color, it was only about slavery, right? Other than Martin Luther King or Harriet Tubman or someone like that, it was about slavery. And I started to wonder, well, what were the other contributions made by people that looked like me? I just started to research all of these different things about Black people, that when I had to write papers for history, that I could educate myself and hopefully my teacher as well. That's really where it started for me. And it just grew this love that I've had forever. But as I became an adult, got out of college, I realized that there were other people that, like Hispanic people and LGBT people, all these people that really needed, were suffering for some of the same marginalization. And so I just thought it's really stupid that we can't all come together. And so that's where it came from for me.
As I like to, maybe I stole this, maybe I saw it somewhere. I'm a big fan of race, the human race, you know?
Yes. Exactly. And I thought, is there something that I can do with this? You know, something that will empower other people and make people feel seen and heard. And, you know, and so I started, I majored in communications in college, but I thought, how can I marry these two things that I care about? And so what it came down to was diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been doing it for 25 years, so long before it was a hot topic. And it was really crazy back then because being so young, I was probably 23. I came in with the mindset that companies should want to do this because it's the right thing to do. It was eye-opening to me that companies didn't get it and they didn't care. And I thought, well, but if you have employees here, all kinds of employees that come from different backgrounds, and, you know, they're happy to be here and they're going to meet all the goals that you have. And it was mind-blowing to me.
What are some of the common mistakes that you see companies make when it comes to DEI hiring and retention?
Leaving out the people. To me, culture is really about your people. And so when these companies take on these DEI initiatives, a lot of times they come from leadership. And I know everybody says, you know, this needs to be a top-down initiative. It does, but it also needs to be a bottom-up initiative. So if you're the most entry-level person in that company, you still have a job and a responsibility to be a decent human being to other people. And so what I see leadership do is bring down these mandates of, you know, we're going to build an inclusive culture. We're going to hire diverse people. We're going to make sure that we are hiring 50% diverse people, all these things. And while they're great, while they're needed, and while leadership, they need to have those mandates, if you don't include the people that you're talking to, it runs the risk of not going anywhere. By involving your employees and saying, hey, what are we getting wrong? What are we getting right? How can I make this climate one that people want to show up to? What's missing, you know? And when they see that you really care, when your employees see that here's leadership that is asking me how we can do this. What are my pain points? How do we make this environment different? They adopt it.
Yeah, I see that it's not just about DE&I, but this is a perfect example where leadership says, oh, well, we've got that program. Check the box. Let me go work on my next problem that's come up. Then when they they're surprised, right? You talk to employees and they go, oh, well, this isn't happening. And you're like, what are you talking about? We've got these programs. How do you mean it's not happening? It's because we're not checking in from the people that we're trying to impact. One of the things I think I share in my book, Fire Your Hiring Habits, a big chunk of it is about culture, but diversity, equity, and inclusion was such an important thing that we actually broke it out of the culture chapter and gave it its own chapter, just saying, hey, look, you have to figure this out. And it's about really I love that you say that it's about the people, because I've always been a proponent of this, because to me, I believe that, I call it potpourri. It just works better. You get better solutions. And the literature's been there for decades saying this. It's like, guys, you put a room of homogeneous whatever. If it's all the same thinking, you're not going to get as good at thinking as if you have a mixture of different types of thought, experience, background, exposures, etc.
Exactly, John. And I think I'm so frustrated at this point, to be honest with you, because it's like, we're really still saying that. We really have to keep telling companies this works. There's so much data. 25 years ago, I was scrambling. There was I think the University of Georgia maybe had the Celix Center. They were the only place in the world that you could find stats regarding multicultural diversity kind of stuff. Now, 2 or 3 taps on your keyboard, you can pull up all of this stuff. There are so many case studies. There's so much data and research out there that, to me, companies that are not embracing DEI or not saying that they understand it at this point, it's because they don't want to. And it's crazy. I tell leaders all the time, if you have employees that have to show up at work wearing a complete suit of armor to deflect all of the BS coming at them every day, they can't be who they are. They have to watch every single thing they say in the way that they say it. They have no space or time or creativity to focus on the thing that you hired them to do.
I'm dancing in my chair here because you're just singing the songs that, they can't show up as their authentic selves.
Exactly.
If they're leaving a part of themselves at the door, you're only paying for part of your human. Why don't you want all of them? Because when they're relaxed, when they're safe, when they're included, then they're able to give you much more value.
Yeah. I think people dig in on the wrong things, because companies are saying, well, we have DEI fatigue, and I'm worried about how people are going to feel if we embrace this. And so I'm always thinking, you're worried about how some people are going to feel because you're embracing all people? Come on. No. And I want to make everybody feel great, because if they feel great every day, they know that I care about them. They know that if they have a family member that's sick, or they have a child at home sick, I want you to be there with that person, because your mind's not here anyway. I am making sure that there's an environment that you get to be human in.
And we're making, I think, some of the, if there's any silver lining to the pandemic, is that it provided more awareness to individuals that they could actually provide a work environment that is a human environment, that actually supports the humans. How about that? That's great. And I see some people pulling away from that. And I'm like, it's a mistake, because you're going to lose some of your best people that we've drank that Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I like the taste of that Kool-Aid. So I'm going to find a place that's going to provide me that Kool-Aid.
Right. And I think there's a stat out there. Don't quote me on this one, but there was a stat out there about how much more work people were doing remotely, because I thought the only thing that wasn't so positive about working remote was that people were able to go home and feel comfortable and feel safe. And now all of a sudden we're letting people into our homes and still being judged for what the backgrounds look like, and, what kind of home you have and all that craziness. So people felt like, man, I'm still dealing with the same thing, and now I don't have that safe space. But productivity was through the roof.
Yeah, it just seems to make a lot of sense. So let me twist it just slightly here and see where you go on this one. So how do organizations move beyond performance allyship to create meaningful systematic change? All right. So as we talked about, you talked a little bit about DEI fatigue. How do we actually create meaningful systematic change?
Policy and procedure, the stuff that's not so fun, the stuff that we don't spend a lot of time on. We get the employee handbook. We don't read it until something happens.
That's right. Yeah.
If you have policies and procedures in place, it's cool to be an ally. It's amazing to be an ally. Let me be clear on that. But if you cannot create any systemic change, I get to vent to you and say, John, all these things happen to me and these people don't care about me. And I get to tell you all of that. And you get to be great and say, man, Risha, I'm sorry that's happening to you. And hey, let's go have a drink after work and we can talk about it. And you're doing everything that you can do as an ally. But you become a powerful ally when you can say, you know what, there's a policy against this. And when you have those anti-retaliation policies, those belonging policies, those zero tolerance policies in place, people know that at the very least, I can go to HR and say, this is happening to me. And then HR, I think one of the biggest mistakes that HR makes is that they never get back to the person to tell them what's happening as a result of something that they may have filed a complaint about. And what I've learned from HR is that they don't know what to do because DEI is so new. And I'm thinking, yeah, but it's like anything else. You learn about it. You educate yourself. You talk to people who maybe know more than you. You bring in a consultant, but there are things that can be done here and they should be done. And I'm not saying that it all needs to be firing somebody. I'm saying, well, hey, we realize this is a problem. This has come up a few times. We are putting this thing in place, this initiative, this here's a 800 number, something that people know something is happening here.
Yeah. So I'll use an example from our organization. So at IPC, we had to properly name it. Originally, it was called the harassment training. And it was like, that sounds like we're doing the wrong thing, guys. And so let's call it the anti-harassment training or the harassment prevention training. But we do it each year and it's mandatory. And I had, each year I get somebody ask me, hey, do I really need to go do this? And it's like, even if you've heard it, we mandate that you have to do it every year because it reminds you that this is okay to talk about. For you should be looking for these things. And if you find it, we want to hear about it because this is not who we're about. And it's also not just your employees. As part of our training, we talk about, hey, if a delivery person comes in and is harassing you, we want to know about that too, because we'll take action. That's impacting you. And we don't permit that.
What's so crazy to me is the pushback that companies get for DEI training. And I had a client ask me, they said, well, DEI training is really making some of our employees feel uncomfortable. So we are thinking that we're not going to make it mandatory. And I said, well, do you make safety training mandatory? Yes. Do you make sexual harassment training mandatory? Yes. What happens when you don't take the training? You get rolled up, you might lose your job, all these things. You have to put that same things in place for DEI. You have to. And I think there are certain people in companies that fall into a diverse category that are uncomfortable every single day that they come into work. So I personally hope we get to a place where nobody feels uncomfortable and we don't have to talk about DEI. It's just what it is. It's just people. We don't have to talk. I'd be happy to work myself out of a job. I've always said that. I would love if we could get to that place. But until we do, diversity training needs to be treated the same as your safety training. It provides psychological safety.
Well, and it's a little add. You're already doing this. Add it into that training. Make it part of that. Make it ancillary to that. Just put it on there. So what are some other small actionable steps companies can take to making their hiring more equitable?
I think hiring is, it's going to this platform of you're not just talking to one person, you're talking to a panel. First thing is make sure that panel is diverse. I always think when people come even interview at my company, I want them to be as comfortable as possible. So I always start with getting to know them versus jumping into the interview so that people can relax a little bit. Well, people also relax when they walk into a room and they see, somebody that looks like them. So I think that's a first start. I think some of the other tips are go out there and use some of that software that takes the bias out of hiring. There is software that will help you make sure that you're not being biased. And then if you're serious about DE&I, I think it's really important to say we want to make sure that our leadership, it looks diverse. We want to make sure that our employee base looks diverse. I had a company had this really audacious goal of 50-50 by 2020. I was working with them in 2018. So 50% men, and then 50% women, people of color, whatever that was. And the employees were in an uproar because they were worried that now that the company focused on diversity, that white men specifically were going to be pushed out. And so the company, they worked on a letter of sorts that went out, a messaging, let me call it that, messaging that went out that explained how this is going to happen. Like, we are not hiring and firing based on solely diversity. You're not going to lose your job simply because we're doing diversity. And they really broke down, like, from here on out, as we hire, we're going to make sure that if we have top 5 candidates, 2 of those are fall into a diverse category. If it's a top 3, 1 of those are going to fall into a diverse category. And I had this great conversation with a young white guy who said, Risha, my concern is if we focus on DEI, we do this 50-50 thing, that if all things are considered equal and there's a white man and a black woman up for a job, it's going to go to her because diversity. And I said, okay. I said, but let me ask you this, all things being considered equal, and you have a white man and a black woman, who's gotten the job all these other years historically. And he sat there and he said, yeah, I'm so worried though about what's going to happen, to me and my kids as they get in this world. And I said, well, hopefully we're going to be better and we're going to create equitable places, and your kid's going to be just fine, just like my kid would be just fine. And we had this such a great conversation where he left saying, I have a totally different thought process about this. And I asked him, I said, have you been worried about, just as much as you're worried now, have you been worried about what it's been like for so many other people all of these years? And so I had a lot of stats for him. And we talked through that. And those are the type of people that you can really have conversation with and really help them to see that we're talking about equity here. White men cannot not be a part of this conversation. They absolutely have to be a part of the conversation, a part of the movement, a part of moving things forward. So there's space for all of us. We've got to lose the scarcity mentality and focus on abundance.
I love that. We're removing the scarcity mentality. I think that is so important, because you talk about this future state when hopefully, this is a non-issue because we're just hiring the right people, and there's not this bias out there. I think about, when you have like a Philharmonic orchestra, they do these blind auditions, right? They're behind a partition.
Yes.
They don't know who it is. They don't know. All they're listening to is, oh, that's beautiful. I
love that. Yeah.
And you've got the job. And then they come out like, okay, I don't know who you are or whatever. You're, candidate number 3, oh, well, that's an odd number. I don't like the number 3. I can just hear that coming,
Yeah, I've read about that. I like that's amazing. And it'd be great if we would redact names from resumes and things like that. So you couldn't even, you just go in and talk to a person.
And there are some, in terms of, there's always, there's challenges to all of this, right? So my mind as an engineer, I'm like, oh, well, we could just do skills-based tests and you could see the scores, but then unless you're really careful, there's bias even in the way you ask questions and do those tests too. So you got to be careful about all this stuff. So it's not a simple problem, which sadly, I don't think you're going to be out of a job here tomorrow. But I'm glad you're working on it. So let me ask, how can leaders be accountable for DEI results, not just efforts?
I think they're accountable by, again, putting those policies and procedures in place, but also making sure that their employees know why you're doing it and why it's important that you do it. I think they can be held accountable by mentoring a wide array or diverse group of people coming up in the company. The success of it falls on them, whether this is going to happen or not. What I know is that most initiatives, no matter what they are, fail at the middle manager area. And I think it's imperative that leadership and the C-suite people are checking in with those middle managers to really see what's going on. One thing that's been consistent in my 20 plus years is what leadership thinks is happening versus what the employees are actually experiencing is huge. So I get to go into all these companies and I talk to them and they tell me how great everything is. And we don't really have any problems. We've had a couple of issues in the past. As soon as I get there, I can't tell you how many people pull me to the side and they just hold me, or I'll give them a hug and they're whispering in my ear, just telling me all of these things and saying to me, especially when I consult, I will have someone that inevitably will send me an email every time and say, I really want you to know what's happening. So as you're working with us, you have a real understanding. And they'll tell me all of these things that are just horrible and that they're experiencing, their coworkers are experiencing. And I like when they do it because I'm able to then go back to leadership and say, hey, have an anonymous person who has said all these things, which is really counter to what we have discussed. Have you heard of any of this? So it's in leadership, and sometimes when you really deal with a leader who cares, it hits them in the heart. They're really just astonished by what's happening, and they will jump right in and try to figure out how are we going to make this happen. I think there are a lot of great companies out there, a lot of great leaders out there. But it takes just a few people to flip that upside down and make it a toxic work environment.
But hopefully the opposite is also true. Once you recognize it, go after it, fix it. And we're going to get into some of the fixes next time on Fire Your Hiring Habits, when Risha will talk about understanding the mindset of Gen Z.
They are saying, you know what, I am not working for this company because they don't care about inclusion. Social impact is just as important to them as bottom line. They want to know, are you doing good in the world?
This has been Fire Your Hiring Habits. If you want to empower your organization to reach new heights, go to johnwmitchell.com to find the techniques and tools you need to attract and retain the best team and boldly reimagine your workplace. Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell is a production of Forbes Books.